We've all been watching worship services on our iPad, or maybe you're putting it up on the TV. Some people are going to drive-in services at their churches where you sit in your car and listen with the other folks in their cars nearby. Well, right now, we've gotten used to wondering about how our freedoms are going to be affected long-term by all these restrictions. One thing we may not be thinking about, though, is that for folks in the military, for the servicemen and women who are serving, there are those who are trying to severely limit the freedom of chaplains in the military to minister to them. It's an odd way to celebrate Military Appreciation Month, which is why we've gathered together today an impressive group of experts who've been there and lived it to share with you some insights about religious freedom for those who are in the military as part of Religious Freedom Month. I want to introduce you to everybody. I'm going to ask each of you guys to please wave or say howdy as I greet you. First, Mike Berry is General Counsel here at First Liberty Institute. He's also a Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Marine Reserve. Hi, Mike.
Howdy.
And we also have Alan West, who served as a Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Army. He also served as a Congressman for a time. Hi, Alan.
How are you all doing?
Doing well. We also have two former First Liberty clients. Leland Bohannon is a retired U.S. Air Force Colonel. Hi, Leland. And also Wes Modder, who served as a Marine during the Gulf War. And that wasn't enough, so he came back as a chaplain in the Navy. Hi, Wes.
Hi.
Thank you for being part of this today. If it's okay with you guys, I wanted to get your titles in there, but if it's all right, since we're all friends and colleagues and it's just us talking, is it okay if I call each of you by your first name for this today? You good with that? Okay. It will just, yes, I think, make things a little easier for us to discuss. Mike, I'm going to start with you and let you set the table for us. What do you see as the current challenges to religious freedom facing members of the military as a lead attorney at the premier religious freedom law firm in the country? What do you see that we're facing, and what should we be alert to?
Well, the challenges really haven't necessarily changed. You know, we had a saying in the Marine Corps. I'm sure they probably had it in the Army and the Air Force and Navy as well. But we like to say it's the same circus, just different clowns. And you know, the circus goes on in terms of the fight for religious freedom in our military. And by that I mean that you've got the usual suspects, a number of organizations out there with anti-Constitution agendas, who believe that it is their duty, I suppose, to try to eradicate religious freedom in the military. And that takes a number of different forms. And right now, in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, what does that look like? Well, you know, our chaplains are smart, enterprising, and innovative people serving in our military, and a lot of them, you know, because the DoD installation chapels have been shut down due to the quarantine orders, these chaplains haven't stopped doing their duties, and they've had to find innovative and creative ways. And sometimes that means turning to Facebook Live, like we're doing right now, or live streaming their messages, encouraging words of hope and inspiration. And they're being told by some of these outside groups, well, wait a minute, you're no longer inside the four walls of the chapel. Well, you can't say that. The separation of church and state prohibits you from saying anything religious outside the walls of the chapel, because gosh, if somebody were to walk by, or I guess not walk by, if somebody were to happen upon your Facebook video, they might be offended by that. So it's really the same tired old song and dance that we've heard for years, right? Which is somebody in uniform hears somebody else in uniform saying something religious, or expressing a view that happens to be religious, and says, I don't agree with that, I don't like that. And the military is often far too quick to shut down that religious expression via censorship, via threats, via punishment, etc. So that's, you know, it's the same story we've seen for years, and it really hasn't gone away.
And to be clear, if you limit the freedoms of chaplains to reach out to the service members, you're not just impacting the chaplains, you're impacting all the service members who don't have that interaction available to them.
Yeah, it's not just about the chaplains' rights. I mean, certainly we're here to protect chaplains and their rights to engage in religious expression. But really, the real collateral damage, if you want to use the military term, is what happens to service members, veterans, their dependents, because they're the ones who are deprived of the message of hope that they so desperately seek. I mean, if you want to tie two really important concepts together, religious freedom and this current suicide epidemic we have that's ravaging our military. Well, I keep hearing DoD officials and government officials say, gosh, we really can leave no stone unturned. And we really can't figure out why so many of our brave warriors are taking their own lives or are depressed or turning to substance abuse. Gosh, if there was only something that would provide them with a source of hope, in desperate times, and then they turn a blind eye to the hope that spiritual fitness and many faith traditions provide for a lot of our service members. I'm not just talking about Christian chaplains and Christianity. I mean, this could be a Buddhist or a Jewish service member. They're not immune from depression and thoughts of harming themselves either. They need to be able to have faith leaders provide spiritual guidance to them.
Well, that's what we're going to unpack today. And for those of you who are joining us either via the Zoom conference or following us on Facebook, on our Facebook page, on Facebook Live, a couple of things. First, we're going to be doing these each week here for at least through May and June. So keep an eye out for future announcements about these kinds of events that we'll be having called First Liberty Live. But we also don't just want you to hear about this. We want you to be informed about it and knowledgeable about it. So we want to make some free resources available to you. This is the first one. It's a downloadable booklet. It's called Faith and Freedom, Force Multipliers in America's Military. And if you just go to firstliberty.org/booklet, it will let you download it there. It explains the crucial role that faith plays in the overall success of our armed forces. Again, just drop by firstliberty.org/booklet, and that could be yours. Alan, you took an oath, both as a service member, but also as a member of Congress, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Lay out for us why it's so important for those who defend the Constitution to also be able to enjoy their constitutional rights while they're serving.
Well, that's one of the key and important things. And when you talk about the name of the organization, First Liberty, your very first liberty in the Bill of Rights is the freedom of religion and the free exercise thereof. I remember when I was a battalion commander, we were getting ready to deploy over to Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003. And I had a brand new chaplain who had come in, First Lieutenant Ken Sharp from North Carolina. And I told Lieutenant Sharp, I said, listen, you're the greatest combat multiplier in this organization. It's not myself as the commander, not the command sergeant major. It's not the weapon system. The greatest weapon system that we have is our resolve and our faith. And you have to be out there to talk to these soldiers because they're going to talk to you and tell you things that they're not going to tell their leadership. And so it is very important that we not try to squelch or to squander that liberty and that freedom that our troops have. And, when you come to our house here in Garland, Texas, you walk in and you're going to see a portrait. That portrait is of General George Washington kneeling down beside his horse in the snow at Valley Forge. Now, there are some people like Mikey Weinstein of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, which is a very oxymoronic title, who would look at that and would probably try to court-martial General George Washington for being on his knees and praying. And that's how absurd it has gotten for our men and women serving us in uniform. I remember, myself as a commander, all through my time in the military, pretty much having a Bible right there on my desk, wherever it was, so I could refer back to it, do my daily devotions, what have you. And if I'm correct, that's something that's really frowned upon today. I know that First Liberty has taken up the case, the young Marine, the female who was there at Camp Lejeune, and she had a Bible verse in her little cubicle, Isaiah 54:17. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. That's the heritage of those who love the Lord. And she, was ordered to take it down. Why? Why would we not want our Marines and our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen to believe that no weapon formed against them should prosper? And so, as Michael said, this is not just about the Judeo-Christian faith heritage. It's about the other faiths that are out there that sometimes it seems they get a little bit of a preferential treatment. So I think that it's important that we understand that a lot of our servicemen and women do surrender some individual rights, because the Uniform Code of Military Justice is a little bit more stringent than your normal civilian law. But when it comes to our Constitution, those people that are defending our rights and our Constitution should also be able to enjoy those rights as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Wes, as a chaplain, I know that you not only shared your faith inside the chapel, but you made a point to go out to where the men and women in the armed services were actually doing the work that they do. You went out to the forward operating bases. You even went outside the wire to where they were deployed in the hills of Afghanistan, and were at risk of being under fire because of that, with nothing but a Bible, no weapon on your hip. What do you see as the role of a chaplain, a representative of faith, while wearing the uniform as a representative of the country? How do those two go together?
It is a slippery slope, because people oftentimes don't have an understanding of the true definition of separation of church and state. And we're not just there to promote Judeo-Christian values. We're there for everyone's religious liberty, those who believe or who don't believe. But primarily, it's to bring comfort to our military men and women who are willing to give their life. And oftentimes, I think the opposing thought is that we're going to proselytize or somehow push faith when someone is in a vulnerable state. That is the farthest thing from a military chaplain's role and function in theater of war. Our role and function is to care and to provide and to facilitate and advise the commander on all things moral and ethical. There are times where we talk with servicemen and women, and it's not necessarily about faith. It's just having human contact and care. And, whether we wear a crescent or a tablet from the Jewish faith or a cross, those are really kind of secondary. But the primary thing is the service member. What do they need us to do for them? A lot of times when we show up in austere places, even when we're not supposed to be there, it's to remind them that God has not abandoned them. We don't start with the premise of someone's personal faith. We just start with conversation. And then that often will develop into, and it could develop into a moment where ministry can happen one-on-one, or questions or conversation. It is a force multiplier for sure. When you are looking in a very bleak situation and a chaplain shows up at 2 a.m. in the middle of the night and says, "How are you doing?" I've had the greatest ministry taking care of our men and women who are at the edge and the uttermost parts of the earth, and I get to show up and care for them. It's not a time for us to push. I think that's the big thing that I've heard in my career is, we're going to proselytize or push something, but that's never been the role and function of the professional chaplains that I've served with in my career. So it's very important. It's important that we're out of our office and we're I would always ask my commander, or if the commander said, "Hey, chaplain, I've got this unit in this location," that usually was, "Okay, I'm getting a plane ticket and I'm going to go where the people are." So
Stuart, I want to add something to what Wes just said too.
Yeah, go ahead.
The word proselytize has sort of become a bad word, but I want to make sure everybody's clear from the legal standpoint. If you look up the word proselytize in the dictionary, the definition is simply to share your faith with somebody else, typically in a compelling manner, compelling being convincing manner, not compelling as in the compulsion sense. But people like Mikey Weinstein, who Alan referenced, they've wanted to they want to co-opt that word proselytize and turn it into something that it isn't, which is this sense of coercion. And I think if people just stop and ask the question, who's being coerced? Mikey would say, well, these service members who can't escape the chaplain's words, right? I mean, that's why it's got to be kept inside the chapel. As soon as he leaves the chapel, then people can't get away. Why? Why can't they get away? Oh, because he's senior in rank. as somebody who's served both on, on active, every one of us here on this screen has served on active duty. And I would venture a guess is that the vast majority of the people that we ran into while serving were smart enough, had enough wherewithal and personal fortitude that if they heard something they just didn't agree with, or they heard something that they just didn't appreciate or value, that they had enough intestinal fortitude to just turn around and walk away, or just say, hey, I don't buy that. I'm not buying into that, or even just simply telling Chaplain, hey, Chaplain, I've had enough, without fearing somehow that their careers were going to be on the line because they disagreed with something that somebody else said. I think it's offensive to tell a young soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine, you're too weak and you're too fragile to hear something or be exposed to something that you disagree with. And that's offensive.
And Leland, that leads to the question I wanted to put to you. As a colonel in the U.S. Air Force, you know firsthand what it's like to lead people who have very different ideas about faith, different from each other, perhaps different from what you believe. How do you command people with different beliefs to work together effectively as a team while still protecting their freedom to believe what they choose?
Sure, I think the Constitution does that really well. And so as a commander, I've definitely been in situations where you encounter people who disagree, Mike, like you were saying earlier. And that's one of the beautiful things about our nation. It's one of the beautiful things about our country is that we are provided the opportunity to believe or not to believe, to hold to those things that we believe to be true, and they don't always have to be the same. And we can make those arguments. As a commander, I would say that you certainly make provision for different individuals throughout the command to worship as they see fit, and that's the benefit of having chaplains both in the deployed locations as well as at home base. And but more than anything else, I think as a commander, I'm simply real. I'm open, and I'm willing to share my life with both my peers, my superiors, as well as my subordinates. And so, am I compelling them to believe what I believe? Well, first of all, the Bible speaks otherwise. I'm not really able to compel anybody to be a Christian. That's something that God alone will do if he so chooses. But I will share my faith with them when and where that's appropriate. And I think that as Wes was saying earlier, there are times when that is appropriate. I had the opportunity to pray as a commander with my subordinates, and it's fantastic. It was the right time to do that. I've also had the opportunity in deployed locations as a commander, but just as an armed service member, to participate in chapel services and to render the call to worship and things like that, where we're able to participate not only as service members, but also as believers in the community. And going back to what Alan's saying, I think there are those out there who would look at, especially commanders, and say, well, some of those rights that are protected in the Constitution may not actually be available to them because of the issues that we're talking about here. Undue influence, subordinates being unable to escape offensive words or offensive things or things that they find offensive. So commanders really shouldn't be able to say certain things. Well, fire in a crowded theater is one thing, but sharing your faith, I think, is quite another. And certainly not to impose it, but to be real and share truth as we see fit.
I'd like to put a question to the group here, if I may.
Stuart, can I just add one simple thing?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
I never in my 22 years of active duty service saw any time when I was ordered to go to the chapel. I never was ordered to go to a chaplain service, being in the field or back at garrison. It was always, knowing that chapel service was available and you could attend. But I will tell you that back at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was a brigade operations officer, it brought us so much together when we would meet with our families and go and, attend chapel service. And after chapel service, we would all go over to the mess hall And of course, the mess sergeant loved to see all of us with our families and our sons and daughters come in there and have a meal afterwards. So no one, this whole thing, like you say, this belief that we are forcing people or it's a coercive nature. No, it is something that is completely voluntary. You're told when chapel services are available. And like Chaplain Modder said, there's nothing greater than when you see a chaplain that will go out and circulate the battlefield. And I remember my chaplain, Ken Sharp, was just terrified of going out on patrols or whatever. But the greatest day was when he volunteered to go out on patrols himself. And you want to talk about the greatest weapon? I told the chaplain, I don't expect you to carry a M4, but if I ever see you out without your Bible, I'm going to drop you for push-ups.
Alan, one of the things I think that up is the question why. Why is Mikey Weinstein doing what he's doing? And he has every right to do it, right? I mean,
because he graduated from the Air Force Academy.
we live in a free country, right? Yeah, we won't get into that one. But here's the point.
Yeah.
Here's the point, and that is the more God is still in the public discourse, the more he is still in the public square, the more people are reminded of their sin. And that's really what it comes down to, is if God is present, then they feel the guilt of the way they're living their lives in many cases, and they don't want to be reminded of that. And so what better way than to not be reminded than to kind of take that and push it to the side and say that it does have to stay within the chapel, right? But when it comes out in the lives of a real person to person relationships, and even being overheard in the office or in the battalion, that's when it becomes offensive, because it reminds them of who they are and maybe who they don't want to be, which goes back, Mike, to your point of we have a lot of that, especially in the military, more so than we do even in broader society. And that's why we see the alarming rates of suicide, is that people are confronted with who they really are. They feel alone, they feel isolated, they feel hopeless. Mm-hmm. Where do you find that hope? Well, there's only one place that you find that hope.
I think it's Leland. I think it's a small minority that makes the fuss. I think in general, the climate of the military is they're very respectful when it comes to things of faith. And, our first freedom is a matter of conscience. And where a lot of people maybe didn't go to an organized religion before military service, we do have Christians in the military. We do have believers in the military. And we have people who don't know what to believe. We have, you have this myriad of people. And when a crisis happens and you're away from your familiar surroundings, sometimes the only hope is in Christ. And I think there's enough hope in that message that can, it can be winsome, and it can create a whole different climate. Not to pick on the Muslims, but if they can take their faith into war, why can't the American person take their faith into battle? They've been doing it since the biblical times, to pray. And, and I just really think that's our first right, a right of conscience, to be able to call upon God and not, and that was my function, is to provide that commander and that climate and that unit the ability so they could pray. There's appropriate times to do it. Psalms 91 was a very famous text that was used in World War II. And those are words of comfort and brings healing. And I think, honestly, the suicide rate would drop in the military if we had a little bit more openness to what God could do for our military men and women. They don't have to check their faith in when they come on active duty. And it's like, there's all these rules and regulations. And I think for the most part, everybody wants to follow them. But it takes this collaborative relationship that, we're America. We're American. And we were founded, as a country to have religious freedom. And so I think it's imperative, that we remember who we are. And it's okay to have a Bible. Now they don't have Bibles on desks. They just have cell phones. right? Because, you know, you won't get offended if you see scriptures, but you know, now it's a phone, and I think it's completely appropriate. I just think it's a small group of people that, you know, that can be antagonistic. I think for the majority of military men and women, whether it's memorial services, funerals, invocations, benedictions, all the things we do, I think is good. It's good. I think the military wants that. The military desires that influence. I think it's just a few people that have a hard time with it, which I think it's their own personal conflict that they're dealing with more than whether, you know, we're doing something appropriate or not appropriate.
And that leads into the question I'd like to put to the group, if I may. You know, forgive me for putting it this way, but you're kind of the old guard. I'm thinking of this question in terms of my nephew, who just recently became a member of the Marine Reserve. And all he knows is the way it is now. So the question I want to put to you as a group is, do you think it's more challenging today for someone to live out their faith in the military than it was when you first put on the uniform? And why do you think that time was better than this time, if you will? Why is it better to have a little more freedom of religion inside the military?
Well, I'll take that on first. I was commissioned 31 July 1982 out of the University of Tennessee. And I will tell you that what you're seeing happening is a reflection of society. Once upon a time, society sought to try to emulate a lot of the structure, the discipline, the foundations of the military, but now society is seeking to, upend that is in the military and make the military more so like the society. So we have a culture war that is going on in our society, and without a doubt, I'll be very honest, I think that you saw a lot of this starting to change with the Obama administration, some of the policies that they sought to implement into the military. And sadly, you had a lot of those generals, those commanding officers that allowed it to happen, and they did not push back against that. And so now we're seeing the consequences and the ramifications. But I believe it's very important that those of us that are retired from the military now, what have you, we get involved with our respective organizations and societies. Like, I'm a member of the 1st Infantry Division Society and also 4th Infantry Division Society and a few others, because when you have these annual reunions and they bring in those soldiers to be there as part of those annual reunions, or you get the chance and you get invited back to some of these duty locations, Fort Riley or Fort Bragg or Fort Campbell, you can interact with these soldiers and you can speak to them, and you can talk to them, and you can talk about your experiences, and you can share those experiences and say, well, not trying to say that it's different or it's bad different, but let me tell you how it was when we were soldiers. And I think that's an important thing that we can share, is those lessons that we have learned. And I'll go to the Bible. I think one of the things you say in the Bible, how after Joshua and his generations had died, and how they stood and said they would be faithful to the Lord and they would never leave him nor forsake him because he had made those promises to him. They didn't tell the stories. And if you look at the early chapters in Judges, guess what happened? The new generations of the children of Israel forgot all those stories. They forgot all the great things that God had done. And guess who they started to fall down and worship? They started to fall down and worship the Baals. So that's why we have to continue to tell these stories, generation and generation, soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guardsman, to the next generation.
Leland, what do you think?
I couldn't agree more. And that's kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier and what I was still in. Taking the opportunity to share your life with people. It could be at a commander's call. It could be one-on-one. It could be as you walk around, leadership by walking around. Maybe you're at the FOB, maybe you're at the main operating base. It doesn't matter where you are, as long as you are talking about who you are, sharing your stories, and communicating love and hope to the younger troops. I think that there's something that we all need to recognize. I'm an Xer, right? I'm a Gen X. I'm not a boomer. So right now I think I'm safe because okay, boomer is what's out there. But it won't be long when, the brown hair that I have on my head is a lot more like yours, Alan. So it'll be
I
a
knew
lot,
that was
it'll be a
coming.
lot grayer.
I knew
Okay.
that was
But
coming.
the
Hey, that's
point,
if you're lucky. You might end up.
yeah,
you know.
right. If it doesn't all fall out. But the point here is that I think because we were created in God's image, we understand and we know truth. Now, whether or not we want to wrestle with it is a different question, but we understand and we know truth when we hear it. And certainly when God is working in our hearts to understand that truth. And I would agree with the panel in saying that I think that things have definitely changed, right? Don't ask, don't tell is repealed. We've got some institutional things that have marched away from the tenets of our nation as they began. You can ask yourself probably 1,000 different questions as to why that is. Part of that may rely, some of that responsibility may not only rely with soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine who aren't sharing their lives with people, but it also is with the church too, because we are a reflection of the society we live in. That being the case, how do we respond? I think just like we are. I think it's more, it's like Alan's saying, it's more of getting out and giving people the answer for the reason that they hope that you have. And if we're not doing that, if the Mikey Weinsteins of the world are kind of ruling the roost and monopolizing the time and the microphone, then I think we've lost something. And it's not just being heard. We actually start to lose lives because people are, again, as we've been talking about, affected by what's going on out there, especially with the op tempo the way it is, the number of deployments. You add the stress of COVID-19 and a number of other things, financial difficulties, and Christ is still the hope that we have.
Wes, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was looking at this question that came in. How can we assure access to Christianity is available if a Democrat president takes the office? Well, I would like to just answer that if I might. I don't know that it's Democratic or Republican. The gospel is the gospel, whether it's Democratic or Republican. And you know, as a minister of the gospel, I'm going to share my faith. I want to follow the rules. But our military men and women have access. They have the local church. There's chapels, and there's always going to be chaplains. And I don't know that military service men and women are going to, you know, not hear the good news for those that want it and for those who don't want it. But I agree with Leland. You know, I think this is not the only generation that's going to deal with this. It's going to continue. Enemies of the cross, whether it's a military platform or a COVID platform or whatever platform we are going to be faced with as believers. I think that, you know, we have to be willing to carry the cross. And I don't want to do it, and I want to be winsome. You know, I want to be kind. But there are times, and it's not even about our cases, really, is it? It's not even about Wes Modder or Leland. You know, it's not even about an Alan West. It's really about, are we being faithful? Are we prepared to carry the hope? Are we prepared to give the hope that lies within us? And I think a lot of our servicemen and women are looking for hope because it can be very bleak. It can be very hard when you're deployed. The divorce rate, suicide rate, alcohol-related incidents. All these things are indicators that there's something that's gone terribly wrong in the soul of a person. And it doesn't just have to be a chaplain. It can be any person of faith. You know, it can be a handshake. It can be a hug, a touch, appropriate touch, a prayer that's offered. It's caring for people. And I think, you know, this generation is one of the greatest generations. I think they're more open to the gospel than any generation I've seen. And I think our military culture and climate, my son's getting ready to leave on Monday, you know, to go into the Marine Corps. And I am very proud of what we're doing in our armed services. Like I said earlier, I think it's just a few people. And I agree, Leland. I think, you know, under the, you know, I'm not trying to pick on President Obama, but I think his policies and procedures made it a very hostile environment for people of faith in the military. And then you have all these appointees, and then, you know, it's like cultural change. And, you know, if a Democrat president comes in there, I pray that he's allowing people to practice their First Amendment, that they have the freedom of, you know, religion and conscience. And I'm just not going to, my ordination as a minister and my conscience are not for sale. I'm not going to allow people to come in there and to take that and to change it. You know, it's my sincerely held religious belief. It's my personal conviction to not, like I said, proselytize, but my goodness, if I'm not willing to give, I'm not going to not give hope because I'm fearful of repercussion. You know, I want to do it appropriately, but it's all of our responsibility to be willing to share that hope with people that we come into contact with.
Wes,
Hey,
I'm glad to
Stuart,
hear your
I see we
son
have a
couple
is.
Oh, go ahead, Leland, and then Mike.
I was just going to say on the tails of Wes's comments there, I'm glad to hear your son is joining up, because I think access to Christianity comes because Christians are there. And so Christians aren't there in the military, then there is no access to, even if the Constitution didn't exist, even if we didn't have provisions that allowed us the free exercise of religion, like some other nations that we could talk about, if Christians are there, there's access to Christianity. And I think that's something that we all have to keep in mind. We all have an individual responsibility.
Mike?
Yeah, I was going to say, I noticed we've got a few questions here popped up in the Q&A, so I want to make sure that I answer a couple of those. So the first one I see is from Chris Millard, excuse me. It says, why does the government allow some faiths to have extra rights while denying normal rights to those who embrace the Judeo-Christian heritage? That's a great question. The government can't, legally speaking, right, pick winners and losers when it comes to faith. That's actually the central concept behind government neutrality in matters of church and state. Is the government should not, and we could do a whole other Zoom call on the history behind the First Amendment and why it was drafted the way it was with two different clauses: free exercise and establishment, et cetera, et cetera. So the simple answer is that's something the government can't do. Now, why does it allow that to happen? I think the simplest answer is probably oversimplified, but it would be the word or the term political correctness. That Mikey Weinstein himself has said this before. When he was asked that question, he said it's because for decades or centuries, Judeo-Christianity has always had the primary seat at the table. Well, it's time for them to step aside and let somebody else have the best seat at the table, and that's his view. That's what he advocates for. And unfortunately, he's found some receptive ears in different pockets of the government, and that's why we're seeing that. The next question I see says for Mike, your recent short video talked about how weakly written Weinstein's latest effort is. Can you explain the weaknesses in his legal arguments? Sure. Most of Mikey Weinstein's letters are generally cut and paste jobs from previous letters that he's written, and they usually regurgitate the same argument, which is something along the following lines: that a handful of people on a military installation in you name it, right, whatever branch of service, whatever installation, heard or observed somebody who typically is an officer or senior in rank, right? Somebody who holds, who's had a fair number of years in the military. And that person was expressing a religious viewpoint, whether it was having a Bible on their desk, like Alan said, or whether it was, simply participating in a conversation and happened to express a religious point of view. And somebody else in the audience, or somebody who is present, happens to be junior in rank. And that somehow leads the person junior in rank to believe that they have to, believe what the senior person believes, all because of the disparity in rank. So it all comes down to this notion of disparity in rank, which I think is actually comical because, I just remember one day walking out of to the parking lot in our battalion area at as Alan mentioned, at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And I happened to see the battalion commander walking out to his car, and actually the XO as well. And I was walking out to my car. And somehow the conversation ensued to where we were talking about the different types of cars that we drive. Because if you know anything about Marines, we love to brag about our cars, right?
Brag about everything.
Yeah. And, you know, and typically the young Lance Corporal is driving the nicest car in the lot. Yeah, is usually the case, you know. And the old lawyer like me is rolling around in like a Toyota Camry or something, right? A 10-year-old Camry. But anyway, I digress. So my point being, why is it that when a young junior Marine sees that the battalion commander is driving like a Ford pickup truck, and that junior Marine happens to drive a Chevy truck, why is nobody making the argument that the junior Marine now feels some sort of pressure to go and trade in his Chevy for a Ford, lest he somehow, you know, upset the battalion commander because you drive a Chevy? You know, how dare you? You know, I'm a Ford man. You better drive a Ford if you want to promote in my battalion. You know, and it's the same and so that's basically the argument that Mikey Weinstein makes. But take that analogy and apply it to religion, right? That the battalion commander happens to be a Christian. Well, everybody in the battalion better be a Christian. Otherwise, you're all going to be on, you know, I know we don't do this anymore. You're all going to be on KP this weekend, right? You're going to have, you know, extra tours around the installation. You know, you can be standing watch all weekend because you happen to have a view that the battalion commander disagrees with. That's, I mean, if you were to bring that up to anybody in the military, they would just laugh. They would just laugh at you in the face and say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And yet that is the argument that Mikey Weinstein makes over and over again. And he gets away with it because people say, oh yeah, well, he's a lawyer. He must know what he's talking about. But he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's actually never won a single legal case on the merits. I'll give him, one time he won a case and it was for a FOIA issue. Okay, he won a FOIA case, but he's never actually won one of these cases in court. And that's why, you know, I'll give you one example. In New Hampshire, he encouraged somebody to file a lawsuit against the VA hospital up there because they have a POW MIA table that has a Bible on it. And they're trying to get that Bible removed because somebody might walk by it and feel like, you know, oh gosh, you know, the VA is now suddenly this Christian organization because they allow a Bible on a POW table, and they threatened to have it removed, and they actually threatened to remove it by force. And at First Liberty Institute, we just said, I remember saying to somebody, I said, look, if Mikey Weinstein or whoever wants to take that Bible off of that table, they're going to have to come through me, and they're going to have to come through First Liberty Institute. I'll chain myself to the table if I have to.
All right. Hey, thank you all for your comments. We're running tight on time here. So a couple of more things and then we'll be wrapping it up. First, for those of you who are watching, we don't want you just to hear the conversation. We do want to both share resources with you that will be helpful, but we hope that those will both educate and inform so that you can join in this conversation wherever you are. We all know that you have to know what your rights are before you can defend your rights. And we have a free religious liberty protection kit for the U.S. military. It's a moderately thick booklet with lots of helpful information that lays out practical ideas on how service members and chaplains can exercise their legal rights. It's free to you. All you have to do is go to firstliberty.org/kit, K-I-T, firstliberty.org/kit, and we are happy to share that with you. I got one more question for you, Alan, and this is a little off the topic of what we've been dealing with, but it's just what we're all talking about right now. You have a saying that as Texas goes, so goes the nation. What are your thoughts on Texas leading the way toward reopening during this pandemic and how that's playing against the constitutional rights of churches? What have you seen? What's your recommendations?
Well, first and foremost, and I'll stick to a constitutional argument, no elected official has the enumerated power to tell any American that they have to shut down their business if they haven't violated the law. Our first liberty is the freedom of religion and the free exercise thereof. If a church has not done anything that has broken the law, our rule of law, you cannot tell that church that they have to shut down its doors. So when I think about what is happening, there's been a lot of fear mongering, a lot of panic, paranoia, and hysteria that has been promulgated out through our society. And it has caused a lot of people who are not studying and understanding their constitutional liberties and freedoms. And I would challenge our young men and women that are going into the military, such as your son, Wes, to make sure that they understand the document that they are swearing to support and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic, because I think you see a lot of domestic enemies of our constitutional rights, freedoms, and liberties. So Governor Abbott here, he's a nice guy, but guess what? It is not his enumerated power to say 25% of you can open up or 50%. That's not what he's supposed to do. Government does not exist to protect our health. They exist to protect our rights. And government does not exist except by the consent of the governed. And as far as I know, no one consented to being told that they had to be under house arrest for the past 2 months or so.
That's what it feels like up here in Illinois. I think in Illinois, we feel like we're under house arrest, Alan. And
you got a crazy governor up there.
But I think the church and the community, we want to obey the government. We want to drive the Chevy pickup if the commander wants. I mean, I think people want to follow good leadership, and we've been very generous in the church. But then you see how the government or people want to take over people's rights. They want to manipulate the situation and say, how far can we go? And then it's like, well, we're not going to go any farther. We've cooperated, and I think the public in Illinois has been very cooperative. And then we get to a point like, nope, we're going to open now. But anyways, it's just a few people. But
as we close out, I'd like to give the Leland, Wes, and Alan, I'd like to give you just a chance to make the connection between the work that you've done in the military with the work here at First Liberty. Leland and Wes, we got to know you because we represented you as an organization when your faith was challenged in the military. And Alan, I know you've had connections with First Liberty for a while. So just a simple question. How do you see the work that we do here at First Liberty connecting with the work you have done in the military? How do you see those two threads connecting? Leland, we'll start with you, and then Wes, and then Alan, and then we'll close it out.
Sure. Well, it's something that I tell my kids all the time now, and that is, you're going to get your chance. So if you think that standing up for your Christian beliefs is under pressure now, wait till you get to college. And none of mine are in college just yet, but we're saving up. But college and then post-college, I think that degree of polarity is going to continue to increase for all the reasons that we talked about during this conversation. If that's the case, if that's what happens, then the linkage between military members who need support and legal advice and counsel on these religious freedoms and issues surrounding religious freedom, well, the connection is obviously unmistakable. I mean, it's there. It's what I lived. It's what Wes went through. It's what many others have experienced. And so those connections, well, we simply need to maintain them. We need to make sure that those connections are there and that people know where to go. I didn't know where to go, except that I had a friend who worked for Jay Sekulow. So we called his office, and then we went to ADF. Mm-hmm. And then because of Mike Berry and the experience that he's had, obviously they pushed us to First Liberty, which was perfect. So I think that it will only increase, and I think the importance for commanders to know about those resources that First Liberty and others provide is very important, because command is where it all kind of comes together. That's where your rights, my rights, everybody's rights tend to conflict because they naturally do now. I have religious convictions that I'm allowed to uphold and live by that now conflict with lifestyles that other people are allowed to live by. And everybody wants to feel accepted, and everybody wants to feel appreciated and free to do what they need to do. We're just going to need to wrestle with that over time. And I think that's where First Liberty really has helped me out and many others.
Wes, how do you see the connection?
Well, I'll just try to be as brief as possible. I believe that, as a minister, as a chaplain, if you're doing great things, you're going to get rewarded for it, and everything, you'll ride off into the sunset and everything is going to be great. You get your end of tour award and thank you for your service. And I had no idea that I would, be attacked the way I was. And so I just believe that you know, I mean, I knew it was in scripture. I just, you know, this was an attack, and it really wasn't about Wes Modder. It was really about the government, you know, coming into contact with the truth. And I called a lot of lawyers, called a lot of law firms, and it was the darkest time of my life. And by the grace of God, through Dave Reber Ministries and Hiram and Mike Berry, they were the first ones to call me. I didn't even know First Liberty existed. And it is a linchpin of, I mean, it is a critical and essential ministry, not just for military, but anyone's first. I mean, I didn't even know there was a religious liberty fight. I was completely, with all my schooling, I had no idea the First Amendment is still being attacked. And so I see it as vital, critical, and I'm really speechless with the gratitude that I have with how professional First Liberty is today, to represent and to defend those who want to live out our First Amendment rights. And so I'm indebted for life. And I always mess with Mike and say, look, you're my lawyer for life, you know. And then it was really meaningful to me. And I know that my other colleagues might not agree with this, but the fact that he was a former Marine and he called me, you know, when you're in a pit with a lion on a snowy day and it looks really, really bad, there's nothing quite as comforting as hearing another Marine saying, my mission is you. I'm coming for you. And that's what First Liberty does. If you're in a pit with a lion on a snowy day and where you see 180 obstacles, First Liberty sees 180 opportunities to defend you and to care for you. And I'm forever grateful for First Liberty, because what they did is, it wasn't just about me winning. It was about the 6,000 other military chaplains across all branches that are winning. And they need to have their freedom to be able to practice their faith from their endorsing agents so they can take care of our servicemen and women.
Very nicely put. Thank you, Wes, for that encouragement. Alan, I'll let you wrap it up.
Look, they say that necessity is the mother of invention. And when you look at what First Liberty is and will continue to do, they are needed on this ideological battlefield of progressive socialism and secular humanism. They are there to guard our guardians, those men and women who stand up and say that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any purpose of mental reservation, so help me God. That's an important closing line. And First Liberty exists to make sure that that closing line will continue to exist, and that our true very first liberty, our freedom of religion, free exercise thereof, religious liberty, will never be threatened, will never be taken away from those who are the most important and the best of our society, those men and women that take that oath. My dad took that oath. My older brother is a Marine, served in Vietnam. My nephew has taken that oath. He's currently serving. My father-in-law took that oath. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. So hats off to First Liberty, because you're standing in the gap. You saw a need and you understood that you were needed to be there for our men and women. So those of you that are on this call, support First Liberty, because the return on investment is all about your liberty and your freedom.
That's right.
And we do want to give people an opportunity to do just that. Thank you, Alan. If you care about the issues that we've been talking about and protecting the rights of chaplains and service members, we invite you to be a force multiplier, as we're calling it. You can have an impact when you join us in the fight to defend our heroes in the military. If that's something you care about and you'd like to see impact and change, and you'd like to see positive outcomes, you can do that. You can get done what you're wanting done by your support of First Liberty Institute. Just go to firstliberty.org/give today, firstliberty.org/give today, and what you want to see done can be done. And here's the thing, because it's not just our attorneys here at our headquarters, we also have attorneys scattered out across the country that are employees here. We also have a volunteer network. And that's what we mean by the force multiplier, because we have that network of volunteer attorneys, top-notch attorneys all over the country. It really multiplies your gift in ways that you can't even imagine. So if you'd like to support us, we do appreciate it. And to close out, Mike Berry, Alan West, Leland Bohannon, Wes Modder, thank you for your service. Thank you for sharing some of your time with us today. We also want to say thank you to those of us who joined with us for this conversation. We appreciate that you took some time out of your day to spend with us. So please go all in with First Liberty. Next week, by the way, next Thursday, our guest will be Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz, and we'll talk about the reopening of churches and religious freedom. We'll see you then.
Right.